Chosen one, have you ever wondered why the people who sacrifice the most in silence are often the ones spoken of the least? Not because they do less, not because they care less, but because they choose to do what is right when no one is watching. If that question has ever crossed your mind, even for a moment, then perhaps this reflection is for you. Not because of coincidence, and not because something bad will happen if you click away. Simply because, if these words resonate with your heart, I invite you to stay for a while and reflect with me. There is a verse in Psalm 56 that many believers return to during the longest nights, when no one else is there to witness their tears. It reminds us that even our quietest tears are never completely meaningless. Many Christians have found comfort in the thought that God sees what human eyes so often overlook. Chosen one, this is not a promise about what tomorrow will bring. It is an invitation to see today through a different lens. Picture someone sitting alone in their car after a long day, parked just outside their home. 10 minutes pass. The engine is off. Their hands are still resting on the steering wheel. They take one deep breath, not because they are relaxing, but because they are trying to put their smile back on before walking through the front door, while inside they feel so exhausted that words can no longer describe it. Chosen one, perhaps you've sat in that car before. Maybe not literally. Maybe it was on the staircase before walking upstairs to greet your children after an exhausting day at work. Maybe it was in a hospital hallway before stepping into a room to reassure someone you love that everything would be okay, even though you weren't certain yourself. Or perhaps it was simply that brief moment at your own front door, taking one deep breath before stepping inside as a stronger version of yourself than the one you truly felt like in that moment. Chosen one, moments like these don't have an official name. No one teaches you how to prepare for them. No book tells you what they will feel like. But if you've ever lived through one, then you already know. You know that strange space between simply being yourself and becoming the person your family needs you to be. There is a question you may have never dared to say out loud, not even to yourself during the daytime when everything appears to be fine. It usually arrives only in the quietest hours, when everyone else is asleep, when the last light in the house has been turned off, when you're finally alone with your own thoughts. The question is this: does anyone truly see what I'm carrying? Not see in the sense of receiving praise, not see in the sense of hearing thank you, but see in the deeper sense. To see the effort, to see the perseverance, to see the quiet price you pay every single day that no one ever mentions. Chosen one, this is not a sign of weakness. It is a deeply human experience. And whether people admit it or not, countless others have walked through it as well. There is something remarkable about people who quietly sacrifice for others. They are usually the last ones to ask this question for themselves. They have grown accustomed to asking everyone else if they're okay. They have become the listener instead of the one being listened to. Over time, putting everyone else's needs first becomes such a natural habit that they begin to forget they have needs of their own, needs that deserve to be seen, acknowledged, and cared for. That isn't a failure. It is often an expression of genuine love. But even the purest love needs moments of stillness to ask an honest question. Am I slowly running empty because I've spent so much of myself without leaving anything behind for my own soul? Many believers find encouragement in Galatians 6:9, where Scripture reminds us not to grow weary in doing good, trusting that faithfulness has value even when its fruit is not immediately visible. This is not a formula for earning a reward on a fixed schedule. It is a reminder about endurance, A reminder that some seeds take far longer to break through the surface than we ever expected. Imagine someone who has spent years caring for aging parents. Every weekend, they drive more than 60 miles just to visit. Not because anyone forces them to, not because someone is keeping score, simply because they believe it is the right thing to do, week after week, year after year. Yet no one in the family ever stops to ask how they are doing. No one asks if the long drive has become exhausting. No one asks whether they're carrying burdens of their own. They don't tell this story because they're looking for sympathy. They tell it because, years later, they realized something that quietly changed the way they saw their life. Other people's silence was never the measure of the value of what they had done. Perhaps you have your own version of that story. Maybe it's the years you worked overtime so your children could receive a better education while you quietly went without buying anything for yourself. Maybe it's the evenings you spent listening to someone else's struggles over the phone while no one ever thought to ask about yours. Maybe it's the countless times you naturally gave the better portion to someone else in your family until your sacrifice became so ordinary that no one even noticed it anymore. Chosen one, true sacrifice is rarely loud. It doesn't demand applause. It doesn't require a ceremony to be recognized. It simply continues, day after day, through small acts of love that almost no one notices, until eventually, even the one making those sacrifices forgets just how much they have given. And that is what makes the question grow heavier over time. Not because you crave recognition, but because there is something deeply human inside every heart that longs to know that what it has poured out has not simply disappeared into nothingness. Chosen one, let that thought rest in your heart for just a moment, not to make you feel sad, but to help you recognize something. Perhaps, at this very moment, you are carrying a story much like this one, and perhaps you have never truly told it to anyone. Not because you're weak for feeling this way, but because you've been strong enough to keep going even when no one applauded, not because you need recognition in order to do what's right, but because you've chosen to do what's right even when no one is watching. What keeps a person sacrificing year after year when there is no visible reward waiting at the end of the road? Perhaps the answer isn't found outside of you. Perhaps it lives somewhere much deeper, a place that only you can truly reach. Chosen one, there are questions that seem like nothing more than a passing discomfort during the day. But at night, they grow. They become heavier. They stop being passing thoughts and become genuine pain. Clear, undeniable, impossible to ignore. Picture this moment. It's 2 o'clock in the morning. You've just rocked your child back to sleep for the 3rd time tonight. The house is finally quiet. You step out onto the balcony and stand alone, looking down at the empty street below. No headlights, no voices, only you, and a weariness that has been quietly accumulating through countless nights just like this one. Then another question rises, one that hurts far more than the questions you ask yourself during the day. Has anyone ever seen this exhausted version of me? Not the version that smiles during the day, not the version that always says, "I'm fine," but the version standing alone at 2 in the morning, with no strength left to pretend, only the honest reality of someone who has poured out so much and isn't sure how much remains. Chosen one, many people read the book of Job and quietly recognize something of themselves within its pages. Not because Job received immediate answers, but because he also walked through a season where nothing made sense. He asked questions that were met with silence. He stood alone with pain that no one around him could fully understand. Perhaps that's what makes his story feel so profoundly human. Not that he possessed every answer, but that he was willing to admit he didn't. Chosen one, stay on that balcony for just a little longer. Don't rush past this moment. Don't hurry to fill it with comforting words. Because some wounds need to be named before they can begin to heal. Some nights deserve to be acknowledged for what they truly are, before we try to explain their purpose. It is not weakness to feel lonely in the middle of the night. It is not failure to wonder whether anyone truly sees you. It is simply part of being human, especially for those who have spent far more of themselves than they've ever received in return. This isn't a complaint. It isn't a search for sympathy. It's simply an honest question, one that often appears in the most vulnerable moments of life. Chosen one, perhaps you've become the strong one in your family, the one everyone calls when something goes wrong, the one with the answers, the one who stays steady so everyone else has someone to lean on. But at 2 a.m, standing alone on that balcony, no one needs you to be strong anymore. No one is watching. And in that unseen moment, the truth becomes impossible to ignore. Even the strongest people have nights when they wonder whether they have enough strength left to keep going. That isn't a moment to hide. It's a deeply human one. Chosen one, for those who have never stood in a place like this, it may be difficult to understand, but those who have, they recognize it immediately. Perhaps you're listening while driving home. Perhaps you're listening just before going to sleep. And if that balcony scene reminds you of one night in your own life, know this: you are not the only one who has ever stood there. In moments like those, it often feels as though there is no one to share the weight with. Yet many believers looking back on the hardest seasons of their lives eventually notice something they could not see while they were living through them. Those painful seasons were not meaningless empty spaces. They became seasons that quietly shaped them. That isn't an easy truth to accept. It isn't something we should say lightly to someone standing in the middle of suffering. Yet many people, years later, look back and recognize that something inside them was being formed long before they understood it. In John 12:24, Jesus uses the image of a seed falling into the ground. Many Christians have long understood this picture as a reminder that some of life's deepest growth begins in places hidden from every human eye. A seed rests beneath the soil, in darkness, unseen, until one day it becomes something entirely different. Chosen one, imagine a master carpenter. Someone brings him a treasured family table that has been badly damaged. The tabletop is cracked. The legs are weakened. Years have faded the wood. He carries it into his workshop, then quietly closes the door. For months, no one sees what happens inside. No one watches him sanding each inch of the wood. No one notices the careful repairs hidden beneath the surface. No one sees him choosing the finish, strengthening weakened joints, patiently restoring what appeared beyond repair. The family simply waits. They have no idea what's happening behind that closed door. They don't know whether the table can even be saved. Then one day, the workshop door opens. The table returns, no longer broken, no longer neglected, restored. Chosen one, no one witnessed the process. They only saw the finished result. Yet the hidden process was always the most important part. Perhaps not seeing something today doesn't necessarily mean that nothing meaningful is happening. Perhaps this quiet season you're living through, as painful as it feels, as exhausting as it has become, even if there are no obvious signs that anything is changing, may still be part of a process whose full picture you simply cannot see yet. That is not a promise that everything will be resolved by a certain date. It is not a guarantee that hardship will disappear according to your timetable. It is simply another way of looking at waiting. Waiting is not always wasted. Chosen one, stay in that carpenter's workshop for one more moment. Even the craftsman himself doesn't know with certainty how everything will turn out. There are evenings when he looks at the damaged wood and wonders whether all his effort is in vain. Moments when he is tempted to tell the family, "I'm sorry. This cannot be restored." Yet he keeps working, not because he is guaranteed success, but because he believes that careful, faithful work has value, even before the final outcome is known. Perhaps that resembles your own journey more than you realize. There is no guarantee that every problem will unfold the way you hope. No certainty that your family will change. No certainty that every relationship will heal. No certainty that every sacrifice you've made will produce the outcome you've imagined. But there is something you can know with confidence. The faithfulness you practice today has value in itself, not because the outcome doesn't matter, but because the person you are becoming along the way matters too. The perseverance you continue to choose, the kindness you refuse to surrender, the decision to do what is right when no one is asking you to. None of those things lose their worth simply because the ending hasn't arrived yet. Chosen one, think back to where you were 1 year ago. Perhaps you were standing in another difficult season then. Perhaps you wondered whether any of it had meaning. Yet looking back now, maybe you can see something you couldn't recognize at the time. A deeper patience, a quieter wisdom, a stronger version of yourself that hardship slowly revealed. That didn't grow because life became easy. It grew because you kept walking through what was difficult. Chosen one, there is one small practice that many people have found surprisingly meaningful. If you'd like, try it right now. Place your hand over your heart. Take one slow breath, then quietly whisper to yourself, "I did the best I could today." Not as a bargain with God, not as a ritual meant to secure tomorrow's blessing, simply as an honest acknowledgement of today's faithfulness. Because even if no one else noticed, even if no one thanked you, what you gave today still deserves to be recognized by you. Many believers reflect on Matthew 6:6 as a reminder that not everything of eternal value happens in public. Some of the most important work God does often begins in the quietest places. Chosen one, perhaps you've experienced those unexpected moments of peace that appear right in the middle of your greatest stress, moments you simply can't explain. A cool breeze passes by just when you think you can't endure another second. An unexpected text message arrives from a friend you haven't heard from in years on the very day you feel the most alone. A familiar song begins playing on the radio at exactly the moment you need to be reminded that you are not completely by yourself. Those moments are small, very small, easy to overlook if we're not paying attention. Yet perhaps those small moments of peace are a kind of language we have not fully learned to recognize. A language that isn't loud. A language that doesn't draw attention to itself. Yet it is still there, still quietly speaking, if we are still enough to listen. Chosen one, perhaps you're wondering, what difference can a moment of peace like that really make? It doesn't answer the question of whether your family will ever truly understand you. It doesn't erase the exhaustion that has accumulated over so many years. It doesn't instantly produce the outcome you've been hoping for. And that's true. One small moment cannot change your entire situation, but perhaps that was never its purpose. Perhaps those quiet moments were never meant to transform your circumstances overnight. Perhaps they exist to remind you that even in the middle of hardship, there is still a place within you capable of receiving peace, even if only for a few seconds. And sometimes, those few seconds are enough to help someone keep walking through one more day. Then another. Then another. If you tried that small practice earlier, placing your hand over your heart, taking a slow breath, and quietly acknowledging yourself, you are welcome to share what you experienced in the comments. There isn't a right answer, or a wrong one. It's simply a chance for all of us to pause, together. Chosen one. There is an ancient story that countless believers return to whenever they reflect on seasons of loneliness that seemed impossible to escape. It is the story of Elijah, recorded in 1 Kings chapter 19. Just before this moment, Elijah had experienced an extraordinary victory. It should have been the kind of victory that filled him with confidence, the kind that made him feel stronger than ever. Instead, he fled into the wilderness. He sat beneath a solitary broom tree, and he prayed that he might die. He said, "I have had enough." He believed he was the only one left still trying, and the weight of carrying that burden had become more than he could bear. Chosen one, pause here for just a moment. A man who had just witnessed one of the greatest victories of his life could still become so emotionally exhausted that he wanted to give up. What does that tell us? Perhaps it reminds us that exhaustion is not proof of weakness, nor is it evidence of failure. Sometimes it comes to those who have loved the longest, given the most, fought the hardest, and carried responsibilities no one else could see. What happened next surprises many readers every time they return to this passage. God did not first answer Elijah with thunder. There was no dramatic display meant to overwhelm him. Instead, there was food, there was rest, and later, there was the gentle whisper through which Elijah recognized God's presence. Everything about God's care in that moment was remarkably quiet. No spectacle, no performance, just exactly what Elijah needed at that moment. A simple meal, a chance to sleep, a quiet reminder that he was not abandoned. Chosen one. Many believers have reflected on this story and noticed something beautiful. Sometimes what strengthens us does not arrive with great fanfare. Sometimes it comes as a quiet peace we cannot explain. A stranger offering unexpected kindness, a phone call arriving at just the right time, a comforting verse that suddenly returns to our memory, a thought that gently settles our anxious heart in the middle of the night. Think again about that balcony at 2 o'clock in the morning, the empty street, the silence, the questions. Perhaps even in that moment of exhaustion, something else was present too. A cool breeze you almost overlooked, a silence that wasn't completely empty, a quiet awareness that somehow you were still standing, not because every burden had disappeared, not because every answer had arrived, but because you had been given just enough strength for that moment. Not abandonment, not rejection, but a presence so gentle that it could easily be missed. Chosen one, you are not weak because you've wanted to give up. You are not a failure because you've felt exhausted. You are simply human, walking a path that many faithful people have walked before you. Exhaustion is not the final sentence over your life. Loneliness is not the final word. Your weakest moment is not the truest description of who you are. It is one chapter within a much longer story. After that night beneath the broom tree, after the quiet meal, after the rest, Elijah stood up again. He continued his journey, not because every fear had vanished, not because every question had been answered, but because he had been given enough strength, enough nourishment, enough hope, enough for one more step. And sometimes, that is exactly what we need. Not complete transformation in a single day, simply enough grace to take one faithful step forward. The story does not end with every struggle disappearing immediately. Elijah remained human. He still carried questions. He still had limitations, but he had enough to continue. Chosen one, perhaps that is true for you as well. You do not have to wait until every burden disappears before allowing yourself to move forward. You do not need answers to every question before choosing to keep loving, keep serving, keep showing kindness, keep living faithfully. Sometimes, enough for today is enough. Chosen one, perhaps what you need most today is not a spectacular miracle. Perhaps what you need is simply enough strength to stand up and live this day well. Tomorrow, if tomorrow comes, God's grace will be there for tomorrow as well. Perhaps you have never been as alone as you feared. Perhaps you have never been completely forgotten. Perhaps the help you've needed has often arrived in ways so quiet that they were easy to miss. But quiet does not mean absent. Chosen one, there is still a beautiful possibility waiting ahead. No one can say exactly when it will unfold, but hope has never depended on knowing the timetable. Chosen one, perhaps one day someone in your family will look back and finally recognize what you've quietly been doing all these years. Perhaps that day will come sooner than you expect. Perhaps it will arrive much later than you've hoped. Or perhaps, in some way, it will never be spoken aloud. Yet it will still be felt, each person in their own quiet way. But there is one truth that does not depend on whether that day ever comes. Many believers reflect on Colossians 3:23 as a reminder that the value of what we do is never determined solely by who notices it. Its deepest worth is found in the sincerity with which it is done. Think again about the carpenter working behind the closed workshop door. Years after the family heirloom had been restored, it was passed down to the next generation. Children grew up around that table. They gathered there every day for meals. They laughed. They talked. They built memories together. Not one of them ever asked who had repaired it. None of them knew about the months the carpenter spent alone in his workshop, patiently sanding every surface, strengthening every joint, restoring what everyone else thought was beyond saving. Yet the table remained, strong, steady, faithfully serving the family every single day. Those shared meals, those conversations, those moments of togetherness might never have happened if someone had simply decided it wasn't worth restoring. The carpenter never needed his name engraved on the table. He knew what he had done, and that was enough. Chosen one, perhaps you don't need to wait for someone to say thank you before believing that what you've done has mattered. That doesn't mean gratitude isn't important. It is. And if one day those words finally come, they will be beautiful to receive. But the value of your faithfulness did not begin the moment someone acknowledged it. Its value existed from the very first moment you chose to do what was right, even when no one was watching. It is not other people's recognition that gives your actions worth. The sincerity with which you offered them carried that worth from the very beginning. Chosen one, consider this from another perspective. If no one in your family ever says thank you, would that erase the nights you stayed awake caring for them? If your sacrifices are never spoken of, does that mean they never happened? Of course not. They happened. They were real. They left their mark, whether anyone noticed them or not. There are mothers who spend their entire lives pouring themselves into their children without ever hearing a complete expression of gratitude. There are sons and daughters who faithfully care for aging parents until their final days without receiving public recognition. There are people who quietly carry the weight of an entire family for years, whose names are never mentioned when the family stories are told. Yet none of that makes their love meaningless. It simply reminds us that the significance of an act has never depended upon whether it is seen. Chosen one, the kitchen lights are beginning to dim at the end of the day. Not because everything is empty, but because it is finally time to rest. After such a long day, after walking together through so many layers of emotion, perhaps now is the moment to let everything slow down. You don't have to solve every question tonight. You don't have to possess every answer before tomorrow arrives. Perhaps, in the days ahead, the question of whether your family truly understands you will return, maybe when you least expect it. And that's all right. Not every question demands an immediate answer. Some questions simply become lighter as we continue carrying them, until one day they no longer weigh on us the way they once did. For this moment, allow the silence to remain. Let your breathing slow. Let your heart rest, even if unanswered questions still remain. Let yourself receive a small measure of peace, enough to continue. Tomorrow may look very much like today. Perhaps another busy day. Perhaps another moment when you'll pause at the front door, take a deep breath, and put on the strong face that others depend upon. But perhaps from this day forward, you'll carry something else with you as well. A quiet awareness that even in the moments no one sees, what you're doing still carries weight, still carries meaning, still carries lasting value. Chosen one, remember the question we asked at the very beginning. Why are those who quietly sacrifice so often the ones least remembered? Perhaps the answer isn't found in changing how others see you. Perhaps it begins by changing how you see what you've done. Perhaps all those quiet acts, those years no one witnessed, were never as meaningless as you once feared. Perhaps one day your family will understand. Perhaps that day will arrive in a way you never expected. But whether it comes or not, the perseverance you've chosen, the kindness you've continued to offer, especially on your hardest nights, has always possessed its own worth from the very beginning. If this reflection has spoken to your heart, perhaps someone you know needs to hear it today as well. A friend quietly carrying invisible burdens. A loved one who is exhausted but says nothing. A co-worker who always appears strong, yet may secretly be asking the very same questions you've wrestled with. Share these words with them, not because you have to, but as a small gift, in the middle of life's long days. Chosen one, this has never been a promise of a miracle, nor a guarantee that a certain event will happen. It is simply another way of seeing what you are living through today. Perhaps tomorrow your family still won't say the words you've longed to hear. Perhaps this quiet season will continue a little longer. But there is one truth you can carry with you beginning today. What you have done, what you are doing, and what you will continue to do is not wasted. It is not invisible effort disappearing into nothingness. Something is being built, little by little, day by day, in ways that you yourself may not yet fully see. Whatever tomorrow holds, perhaps today you have learned one thing. What you have faithfully given has never been completely overlooked. So place your hand over your heart one more time. Take one slow, deep breath and quietly remind yourself, I gave my best today, and for today, that is enough. Chosen one, walk out of this quiet season remembering just one thing. You do not need someone else's approval to know that you've lived faithfully. Simply keep going. One more day, the same way you always have, quietly, sincerely, and strong enough to know that your worth has never depended on who was watching.